The recording is going to start. All right, there it goes. So, welcome to the Sunday afternoon Thai time Sangha meeting. We have 7 people on, um, and that we've been asking a question about: did the Buddha teach just the Dhamma, or it's often also referred to as the Dhamma Vinaya or the Dhamma Vinaya? Now, the difference between Dhamma Vinaya and Dhamma Vinaya is the difference between tomatoes and tomatoes, or apartments and flats are the same thing, just different ways of saying it. In fact, Sita and Chitta are the same word. It just depends upon who's saying it and what background that they have. But in fact, the reality is that we really don't know exactly how to pronounce the Pali, because the Pali language is not exactly one language anyway. That there were various dialects, and that the sutras were compiled in various dialects all throughout India, mostly collected together in the 3rd century BC, so that they could be taken by the son of King Ashoka to Sri Lanka. And he went all over the place gathering up stuff to take there. So, if somebody says Vinaya or Vinaya, don't correct them, because we don't know what the right way of pronouncing it is. And the Thais have their own way of pronouncing things. Like Paticca Samuppada in Thai is Paticca Samuppada. And so we can say, first off, that the Dhamma is kind of fixed. It's kind of set. There's very little changes made. Everything is the same. But in the Vinaya, it is circumstantial. That in fact, as the Buddha was dying, he gave permission that the monks could change the rules. And then they got into a great big squabble about a century later, and they wound up not changing any of the rules because they couldn't decide amongst themselves which rules that they could actually dispense with or which rules could change. Now, there's another funny little point, and that is that about 30 of those 227 rules have to do with the way that we eat food. And guess what? Because in our society we use eating utensils like knives and forks and spoons, we disregard automatically much of the Vinaya. Why? Because it's talking about eating food with your hands. How do you clean your hands? How big a bite do you take? What do you do with your hands after you've taken a bite of food? I actually watched them eating food in India and then in Sri Lanka. When I was at the Sri Lankan Watch, they would always eat with their hands. So I ate with my hands too. It's sort of like monkey see, monkey do. You see what they're doing, and you follow along and do it the same way they're doing it, which is much of what the Vinaya is all about anyway. That the Vinaya is actually, in a way, so loose as to become less important than the Dhamma, and then in fact the Dhamma itself specifies what the Vinaya was supposed to be in the first place. And a good example of that would be following along with the Dhamma rule of don't hurt people. And so gossiping would be a way of hurting someone. That if monk A tells monk B that monk C is a bad monk, then that can cause harm. Well, that rule is actually in the Patimokkha, in the Vinaya. Mike, you got a question? I can't hear you. Your mic is on, but
Is
I don't. There you go.
is the veneer.
So
Hello, can
what's
you
your
hear me?
Yes,
You know,
I can hear you.
yeah, yeah. What is it?
I'm listening.
You can. Hello. What is the Vinaya?
The Vinaya,
Yes.
actually, you could say that the Vinaya is a book or a set of books. That's one way of talking about it. You could also say that the Vinaya is the Paddy Mork, the 227 rules of the monks. You could also, in fact, the reason why it takes several books to do 227 rules is because every rule has at least one story behind it, and some of them have several stories. And that if you read the stories in the Vinaya behind the rules, you'll understand the rules a lot better. Here's a clear example of that. There is a precept. In fact, I think it's number 6. It's either number 6 or number 7. And in Pali, it's Wakala Bojanawe Ramani Sakabadam Samatiyame. Does anybody here know what I'm referring to? Wakala Bojana. It's wrongly translated as eating at the wrong time. And yet the story in the Vinaya has to do with a group of monks laden down with a whole bunch of groceries that they have collected together, come back to a group of monks to share their food. And the head monk who was sitting there decided that he was going to question them as to where all this food came from. And the answer was is that they were at the let us say the ancient Indian version of the state fair. There was a celebration that included rides and food and shows and all kinds of stuff that the monks should have not been to. And for that reason, the monks who were there who were being invited to share the food with them, they wouldn't have anything to do with it. Now, normally what would happen is the state fair would last all day, and especially into the afternoon. Back in those days, when the monks went out for food was more important than when the monks ate. And so Wakala Bojana has to do more with when the food is collected and where the food is collected, not actually the time of day that it's eaten. And yet in modern traditional Theravada, for some reason or another, somebody developed a clock and they found out that there was a 12 on that clock. And so they say, okay, you can't eat after 12 o'clock. Well, the Buddha didn't have any clocks, but what they did have was traditions. And one of the traditions is that people would take afternoon naps, and then when in the evening time, they would go shopping, they would go buying stuff. This was a time for socialization. And this also, after that, they would go home and fix food in the evening time. And then the Buddha says you can't go out in the evening because you're going to mess with people. That in fact, there's a whole list of reasons why the Buddha says don't go out at night. And that has to do with there's going to be thieves. You could walk into a cesspool. You can't see where you're going. You could fall into a thicket. You could fall into the wrong neighborhood. You can bother people because they're busy eating their own food. That the best thing to do is to get up in the morning and go out and collect the leftovers, the scraps that the people didn't eat. Nowadays in Thailand, it depends upon what neighborhood that you're in, but I think that several of you have actually gone out on Pendabat at one time or another, and you wind up getting really good stuff. But a lot of it was left over from the evening before. The the meat and rice dishes and all of that were left over probably from the night before. But Achan Po made sure to take his group of monks into the poorest neighborhoods that were within walking distance of Wat Suan Mo. And what I wound up with sometimes was a half-eaten little fish with the scales showing on one side and fish on the other, a half-eaten banana. They didn't use plastic back then. Daniel says that he's afraid of the Thai food because it's given out in little plastic. Well, in those days, they didn't have plastic, not in the 1980s. What they did was they took a scoop and just put the rice right there in the bowl, right along with the dirty banana, unless you were wise enough to keep your bananas and stuff like that out of the bowl. That's why you turn it up and put it in the lid upside down. Or if you've got somebody with a bag, you can put it in the bag. But the point that I'm making here is that the Vinaya is very flexible and has been flexible over time, and that it originally got started based upon a set of stories, but a lot of the rigidity that's come in has more to do with modern culture than it does the original teachings of the Buddha. But the Dhamma is fairly fixed. In fact, it's fixed to the point that it's easy. Dukkha, dukkha, nirodha. That's fixed enough. When you see dissatisfaction, discomfort, come out of your dissatisfaction, come out of your discomfort right away. And so we can also add an extra point to it in the sense of, instead of talking about the Dhamma Vinaya, we can also talk about it in the sense of the triple gem, the Buddham, the Saranam Gacchami, and then the Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, and the Sangham Saranam Gacchami. That in fact the Vinaya has almost everything to do with the Sangha, how monks treat other people. That's what the rules are really all about, is that don't eat with, or don't talk with your mouth full of food. Don't, in fact, fill your mouth with food. Eat small bites. Why? Because a great big mouthful of food, when you've got an audience looking at you, you want to be dainty. You want to be polite. You don't want to in front of the lay people. And so these are the kind of rules that you'll find in certain sections of the Vinaya. Also, in certain sections of the Vinaya, it has to do with how the monks treat each other. And one of the biggest points is that do not do anything that divides the Sangha. This should have been taught in every religion. This should have been taught in Islam. Why? Because you've got a huge number of divisions, two great big ones, the Sunni and the Shia. But within the Buddha Sangha, there is a rule saying that you cannot divide the Sangha. This group of monks can't go off and say, oh, we're better than those group of monks over there. That in fact, whenever there was divisions, it was almost always localized in the sense of this area, they do stuff, but everybody in that area does it like this. And then everybody over here, because of the traditions and the distances, they do it. This is why we have Zen, and we have Theravada, and we have Vajrayana and Tibet. It's not because of arguments about what is right with the Dhamma or what is right and wrong with the Vinaya, but rather that the practices grew up locally practicing the same thing of the dukkha, dukkha, nirodha. So the Dhamma remains the same. Probably the best and clearest and most beautiful example of that is a video that I have on our YouTube channel where Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is entertaining a guest who happens to be the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama went to see Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and called him my elder Dhamma brother. And there on the video, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is explaining Paticca Samuppada to the Dalai Lama. Now, if that doesn't show something, I don't know what is, because so many people, especially Tibetans, say, or Western people who happen to like Tibetan traditions, they think that Tibetan Buddhism is better than Theravada Buddhism. Well, we've got some solid evidence that that's not necessarily the case when you have the real top dogs in that discussion. The same thing is true with Zen, that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, in fact, was quite a fan of Zen, and a lot of Zen monks would come from Japan to Thailand. Some of them, in fact, were lay people. A good example of that would be Gil Fosdale. Spent quite a lot of time in Japan, and then he comes to Thailand, and he wants to prove to the Thai monks how good he could sit, because he learned to sit in Japan. And you know what they did with Gil? They put him in the back of a Wat, way off, Cootie all by himself. They said, well, if you're that good at sitting, then go do it. Another one example that I have is what's the dude's name at Wat Khao Tum? You're there now. What's the important one? The one who died in 1962? Do you know his name?
Emanuel Sherman.
Yes, exactly. Emanuel
Emanuel.
Sherman was a Westerner in his early life. He was a design artist, and then he went to Japan and stayed a number of years in Japan and picked up Zen art. And then he comes to stay with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And this is the start of the spiritual theater, was founded upon Emanuel Sherman's artwork. But he was a Zen monk, but he spent many years in Thailand before he died. So here in Thailand, we do not make the kind of distinctions that Westerners make when it comes to the Dhamma. Now, the Vinaya, there is some differences that, in fact, the Mahayana have the idea of that much of the Vinaya was done in the time of the Buddha, and therefore we can dispense with many of those early rules. And so that's the big difference between Mahayana and Theravada is, in fact, the Vinaya, not the Dhamma. I think that this is an important point to make, is that the rules are important. They're just changeable according to circumstances. And the circumstances are always arranged around the Dhamma so as to not cause harm, not cause damage. Well, some cultures are one way and other cultures are another way. And you can do something in this culture and everybody likes it, and you can do something in that culture and cause a stir. And some of that has to do with language. In fact, one of the little jokes is that in England, the boy can go to the girl's door and knock her up. But in the southern part of the United States, when the boy knocks up a girl, he's going to have a shotgun wedding if he can survive. Okay? So that's the kind of differences that has to do with language and customs and whatnot like that. And even in Thailand, the Vinaya is subject to Thai culture. That in fact, the Patty Mok that the monks practice in Thailand is closer to what the Thai people expect the monks to have as their Patty Mok, instead of the actual rules of the Patty Mok. And that very few places actually study the Patty Mok as an instrument written down a long time ago. Wat Si Tanu, by the way, here on this island is famous for the fact that they actually study the Patty Mok there. All the other Wats in Thailand go by the culture, whatever the Thai culture says. Well, a lot of it is pretty close. In fact, it's exactly the same. But an example of where it's different is that the Buddha, there was a time when the Buddha says you can't go out at night. And one monk got unhappy with that. And it took him 3 months. And finally, his other friends said, "You've got to go talk to the Buddha about this." And when he did, the Buddha made an arrangement with him that is now um, quite, let us say, useful. And that is that the Buddha gave this monk permission to take food away from the eating place where they had gathered together. He can take his bowl, still half eaten or whatever, and back to his kuti and eat it at night. What the rule then becomes is that you cannot keep food overnight, because in those days you didn't have any safety. You didn't have refrigerators. The food would probably go bad, and worse off, you're going to have critters in your bed with you if you've got food in your bed, especially ants. And they've got some ferocious ants in India, and even more ferocious ants in Thailand. And so you do not keep food in the room overnight. Not only that, but you've got Gila monsters, you've got mule deer, you've got all kinds of snakes, little wild dogs, etc., like that. And so the better thing to do, if you haven't eaten all your food, but it's time to go to sleep, is to put that food out for the animals. And so this is where the rule of the monks don't keep food overnight. It's a practical rule. But people who have refrigerators nowadays, they don't see any point in that rule. In fact, the refrigerators were invented because of the reality of that rule. That nobody, in fact, and here's something that's very interesting. In the West, like in Europe and America, people go shopping every few days, maybe once a week. Dietrich, how often do you go shopping?
It depends a little bit, but I would say like 3 times a week.
Okay. Do you realize that you depend upon a refrigerator? That if you did not have a refrigerator, you would actually be going shopping every day, and you'd be throwing any food out that you bought that didn't last.
I do, because my refrigerator once broke down, and then I was really like, ooh, everything defrosted and everything going bad.
Yes, exactly. So that whole point then, that Western mentality doesn't have that understanding is that back in the time of the Buddha, or even 100 years ago, nobody had a refrigerator. Therefore, our whole life and eating food had to revolve around the fact that food went bad, either on its own because of bacteria or bigger creatures. But you don't keep. Go ahead.
Is that because you say that Vinaya is like, it feels a little bit, when I'm listening to you, like that's a really changing thing actually through time and through culture, like how the rules are applied? Because
exactly. Now that we have refrigerators, and in fact, I don't know of any Wats in Thailand that have refrigerators that are available to monks. That many Wats have kitchens, but only the kitchen staff go to those kitchens at big Wats. But in the United States, they rented houses. And every Wat in the United States has refrigerators that are accessible by the monks. Which means now those rules are getting bent and twisted around.
Yeah, but that's not a bad thing, is it?
It's not a bad thing at all.
No.
Okay. But in fact, what I'm saying is that we have to learn that anicca vata sankhara, things change over time, and it's the vinaya that changes over time. Even though the old rules are written the way that they are, practicality gets in the way of that. So even though the big distinction between Mahayana and Hinayana Buddhism is about the rules, guess what? The Hinayana, they bend and change the rules just like the Mahayana did. They just did it later, a few centuries later, just long enough to get a distinction in those names. So we can do one of two things. One is we can change the subject and talk about something different now, or we can go into even more detail about what's in the Vinaya. Because there's some very interesting things in the Vinaya. So let's talk about some of the things that are very interesting. Remember that these are all stories. And also there are allowances. And that one of the sections of the Vinaya is an allowance for medicines. And there makes it very strange because one of the allowance for medicines is alcohol. And yet all the young people who are into Buddhism and whatnot say, well, wait a minute, we've got a precept, the Sura Merya Macha Pamatadana Bairamane Sakabadam Samatiyami, means that monks can't, they have to abstain from alcohol. No, that's not true. Not only is alcohol used as a rubbing compound on the outside of the body, many concoctions in the time of the Buddha used alcohol. An example of that even today would be putting alcohol in a cough syrup. The distinction about it is that the drinking alcohol leads to heedlessness when you have a certain quantity of it. Getting drunk. And so there's a story in the Vinaya about, this is kind of a funny story. What happened was that there was a very famous monk, and the people of the town were asking some of his friend monks, what does this guy really like to eat? And they played a trick on him. There is I don't know if you guys have seen it yet, but it's actually quite common in Thailand, but it's even more common in Cambodia. I've seen it in the Cambodian watch in America. And it is fermented rice. It looks very dark purple. It looks like rice, but you cannot come within an inch of that without smelling the strong odor of alcohol. Okay? And so the monks around said to the people in this village, oh, this monk likes that particular rice dish. And that's all he got that day, a whole bowl full of that stuff. And when he came back to the Buddha, he was reeling. And that's where that precept comes from, because you see, alcohol is a particular, let us say, it's walled off, it's separated. You have laws about it. You have particular things like beer, wine, spirits. You've got sections of the government that regulate it, they tax it, sometimes they make it illegal, all of that kind of stuff did not exist in the time of the Buddha. The food that they ate was not discriminated against as to whether or not it had fermented long enough. Then, in fact, in the area of the Vinaya, there is one passage, it's several pages long, that reads like a bartender's guide. And they've got toddies and they've got other things like that. And one of them, which I think is really funny, is this. You have someone climb a coconut tree, you stab it with a knife, you put a reed straw into it, and then you pour cow's urine through the straw into the coconut. Why cow's urine? Because cows had yeast infections. Ta-da! Yeast. And by putting a little urine in that introduced the yeast, and you leave that coconut hanging on the tree for a few weeks with that straw in it. And then you cut that particular coconut down, and then you sip out of that straw, and you've got some pretty heavy-duty stuff. So this is what happened in the time of the Buddha. We've got coconut trees here, and I don't think anybody is making that kind of stuff because Thailand now has particular laws. They've got laws about wine, they've got laws about beer, they've got laws about spirits, and none of that existed in the time of the Buddha. But what he did have as part of that Sura Merya Macha was the padana, the heedlessness. It's not, the Buddha is not against drinking alcohol, he's against getting drunk. And that's what in fact, that's what the DUIs are all about. They don't care how many beers you've had, but in your blood alcohol content is a certain level so that you're incapacitated. They want to put you in jail. All right, so this is what it's about in the Vinaya also. And in the medical part of it, they use alcohol for all kinds of things. Now, there's another thing in the medical book, and I'll go ahead. I used to be very quiet about this one, but now I don't care so much. And that is that the Buddha allowed for smoking, intentionally allowing for smoking pipes and a pouch to carry the stuff in. And he had regulations about what kind of material the pipe could be made from, in the sense that it couldn't be made out of gold or silver or ivory, but it could be made out of bone or wood. Now, in those days, I don't know whether the word chillum was used or not, but that's generally what they smoke in India. Is the pipe is about this long, and you hold it up like that to smoke. Here's a question for everybody. What did they smoke in the time of the Buddha where he allowed smoking pipes in the medical section of the Vinaya? What did they smoke? Guess what? It was not tobacco. Tobacco came from the New World. Tobacco came 1,500 years after the time of the Buddha, maybe 2,000 years after the time of the Buddha. So what did the monks in India in the time of the Buddha smoke?
Was it hash?
Possibly the answer to that is all kinds of herbs that were used for medicines, including the kind of stuff that's now illegal. That marijuana has been widely known as to be medicinally useful. Opium also has been used as a medicine widely. This is allowed in the Vinaya. Go ahead, Dietrich. I thought that you guys might get a load out of this part of the Vinaya. I've got it, by the way, in English. Achan Tanisaro, I have a very early old translation of his, but in the more modern ones that are out on the internet, he leaves all of this out.
Ah. By the way, marijuana is not forbidden in Holland, in the Netherlands.
Well, it's
Okay.
beginning to not be forbidden all over the place. That in fact it was forbidden when it was forbidden for racially motivated reasons. Opium was illegal in the United States because of the Chinese coolies who were building the railroad, and marijuana was made illegal because of the Mexicans and the Latinos and the blacks. That in fact, when I was a child in the 1950s, they called it rabbit tobacco, and it grew down at the riverbank in every river in the country. During World War II, most of the rope that the Navy used was made out of hemp, and the hemp grew wild. It wasn't until DuPont Corporation invented nylon, and when they invented nylon and Orlon and these other synthetics, then DuPont went to the U.S. government to have hemp made illegal. Not because it was associated with people getting crazy, but it was because of politics. And at one time I was reluctant to say anything about this, but now that marijuana has become legal in many places in the United States, it's legal here in Thailand. They're thinking about putting it back illegal, but right now it's still legal. And so you could say that from the time of the Buddha, it was also legal. Now there's another point to make, and that is that heroin is not opium. Heroin is derivative of opium, but opium was not dangerous when you would just gather it up naturally. Hey, Mike, glad to see you back.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
yeah.
So,
I had a question.
go ahead,
Nora.
Dietrich.
Yeah, because you say about in the time of the Buddha, like it's alcohol was okay and smoking grass or whatever. But what about being vegetarian? But what about eating meat?
That never was an issue with the Buddha. That in fact, a way to tell this is to tell the story about that there was a vegetarian movement back in the 70s and 80s in Thailand. And a whole bunch of people got together, rode on a bus down from Bangkok to Wat Suan Mok to try to, let us say, tickle Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And so they would ask him what he eats, because they were going to set him up, just like they tried to set up Jesus, like gold and whatnot. And Jesus said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render unto God the things that are God. Well, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa had that same kind of answer. He said to these vegetarians, I eat food. I eat food. And that, in fact, vegetarianism, I think, has something to do with the idea of sacred cows in India. Well, guess what? There are no cows in Thailand. That's sacred enough. They don't exist. What do they have in Thailand? They have water buffalo, Kwa. You've heard of the bridge over the river Kwa? That's the Kwa. And that there's a lot of them. Michael, David, have you seen Kwa on this island?
Yeah,
Yes.
I have a few that are my friends.
Okay. Have you seen any cows on this island?
Depends.
No, there are no cows in Thailand. Okay, so beef doesn't exist unless it's imported. What they eat instead is pork and chicken and fish. But that's basically the answer. Is that the Buddha ate what the people ate and was given the leftovers of what the people ate. In the Watts in the U.S., the lay people, even if the cooks are cooking in the Wat, they bring the food to the Wat and cook what they want to cook and serve that to the monks. And the monks who go out on Bendabat, they get whatever the people give them. Now, you can imagine, in fact, that it would be absolutely against the Vinaya for a monk to refuse food. That we're not allowed to refuse food. When somebody if they could put a live snake in the bowl and we just accept it. I mean, if they can handle that snake and put it in the bowl, we can handle it and take it out of the bowl. We don't have to eat it, but we don't refuse it. You see, the vegetarians are going to say, oh, you can't put that piece of pork into my bowl. Well, guess what?
Yep.
You're probably not ever going to get any food from that house ever again your whole life. And if you do that around and tell everybody that you're not going to accept any food or any meat from them, then you're probably not going to eat anymore.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, the Vinaya is like a changing thing, but the Dhamma is like, don't cause suffering.
Don't cause suffering. And if you refuse,
animals could be like, eating animals could be like causing suffering in the life of the animal.
well, the guy who killed the animal was doing that, not the monks. Okay, so let's look at the chain of events. There are the people who raise the animals from birth. The veterinarians help the birth process. And then the cow is young and it's been fed by the kids. And then when the cow is older, it's fed by the adults. And then the man who runs the avatar, he comes around and he buys the cow. And then his driver drives that cow to the avatar, And then the men in the abattoir, they herd these cows around, and then one of them will kill the animal, and then 10 others are going to cut it up. And after that, then you've got the guys who were going to package the meat, the guys who were going to transport that meat to the stores, and then you have the workers in the stores who are going to handle that meat, and then they're going to have the customer who comes into the store and buys the meat, takes the meat home, cooks it, and then their grandmother gives it to the monk. Now, who's responsible for that cow? Who gets the bad karma in all of those people who have handled that meat? It's a stupid question to ask. The monk didn't kill the cow. The woman who served the meat didn't kill the cow. There was one guy that killed the cow, but he was there among other guys who were doing that, and I wouldn't say that the death of that cow can be placed upon one person, because the veterinarian who birthed the cow and the people who fed the cow and the people who transported the cow all knew where that cow was going. And so they had a hand in it. Okay, so this idea of wrongdoing is messed up. We're talking about wrongdoing or right doing as an individual. What do I do? Now, let's take this a little further and investigate. Let's talk about the vegetarians who say, oh, I'm not going to eat that cow. I'm going to eat only organically grown vegetables. But the worms are going to eat those vegetables before I do, so I'm going to go put some poison out and kill the worms so that they don't eat the vegetables. All right? And the fact is that we can't get away from killing. There is no possible reason. What the Buddha was, he was not against killing for eating. He was against killing for ceremonial reasons. Okay, so here's a story out of the Vinaya. The Buddha was sitting on the up on the hill, sitting there quietly, and down below, in fact, this is not in the Vinaya, it's in a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, I think it's number 52. But anyway, he's sitting there on the side of the hill, looking down, and in the middle of the day, he sees all the goat herds and all the sheep herders bringing their flock at the wrong time of day. They bring their flock out of the fields back into the community, back into the town in the evening time, but this is in the bright part of the day. And so the Buddha was curious about that. Well, when he went down there, he could see that one of the little lambs had gotten caught in with his feet in the rocks, and the goat herd was in a hurry trying to pull that little lamb out of that rock. And so the Buddha says, I'll take care of this. And so he gently got the lamb out of the rock and then put it into his arms. You've seen pictures of Jesus carrying a lamb. Buddha did it first. Okay, Buddha carried that lamb first. And so where did he carry that lamb? He carried it to the king. Why did he carry it to the king? Is because the Brahmins had said, the king asked a question about, this, that, and the other thing. And the Brahmin says, we can take care of that, but we need to kill 500 animals. And so the king ordered all of those animals out of the fields to come being killed for a ceremony. And the Buddha carried that lamb with him right up to the king and had a conversation with the king. And guess what? All of those other 500 animals didn't get killed that day. It was the Brahmins who wanted to do the ceremony. Vegetarianism is a backlash in India of the Brahmins killing mass amount of animals. And guess where else that happened? It happened at the temple in Jerusalem. Exactly so. And that this was happening in the time of Jesus, even though in the time of the Buddha there was a prophet called Jeremiah. You've heard of him as the weeping prophet. He was against all of that animal sacrifice. The Buddha was against animal sacrifice. He wasn't against the killing of animals for a good reason. He was against the killing of the animals to make the Brahmins wealthy. from ceremony. This is where the Buddhists come into it. That's different than the Hindus. The Hindus have all of this vegetarianism as a backlash to the Brahmins killing all of these animals. That's why, in fact, the cow was made sacred, was to keep the Brahmins away from killing cows. Like I said, in Thailand, got no cows. Maybe they killed them all. I don't know what happened. But for one thing that's very interesting is that there is no dairy industry in Thailand. That is until a Danish company and started one. There actually are cows in Thailand now, but they're part of the European farming or dairy farming industry. That in fact you can't buy milk except in certain places like Lowe's, Tesco, 7-Eleven, these Western places is the only place you can buy milk. Michael, you've been enough to Thai restaurants. Do they serve milk?
No.
Hmm.
The only thing is maybe condensed milk out of a can, but that's imported too. I'll put
That's
some of that in the
imported.
Thai tea. But otherwise, yeah, no, there's no milk.
As a culture, Thai people are lactose intolerant because milk is not part of their diet. And so the whole point of vegetarianism is different in Thailand than it is in India, but there was enough Thai people that got their nose up in the air about vegan and vegetarianism that they confronted Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and all he had to say was, so much for vegetarian. That in fact, scientists and the doctors, they know that humans have been eating meat long enough that we depend upon it biologically. And so the vegans and the vegetarians have to work really, really hard to find legumes and nuts and stuff like that to fulfill their diet. They have to be very careful to get the right amount of stuff to where just put a little meat in your food and there's no problem. And so there is nothing about vegetarianism that has anything to do with Buddhism, because the monks don't kill animals anyway. Their whole point in life is to be friends with the people who give them the food without making a big deal about what food is being given or where it came from. That's not the monk's business. Michael, you're smiling. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that it's like if someone wants to be a vegetarian for whatever strange health reasons, it's totally fine, you know. And there is a exception of, you know, not eating meat if it's been killed specifically for a monk. But this, like how Dhammarato has been saying, can be seen as being a ceremonial thing. So.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's another story about that, in fact, and it was with Achan. It was either Achan Tanisaro or it was Achan Samedo. Now I'm thinking it may have been Achan Samedo. Yeah, but one of those two very famous monks, one of them was invited to Thanksgiving dinner at a household. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And then the guy who invited him says, we've got a special turkey we're going to kill just for you. And the monk said, I wish you hadn't told me that. You could have killed that bird. Everybody was going to eat it, but the guy told him that we're going to kill this bird just for you. And the monk said, nope, don't want it. You go kill any old bird you want to eat, but don't tell me you're killing it for me. So that kind of answers that question that you had there, Michael, about the monks. They don't want you to kill for them, but we handle it very politely. You don't go to that guy and says, "You killed a cow for me. You killed a bird for me. Don't do that." You know, that's not the way that you handle it. You handle it in a very easy way, like, "I wish you hadn't have told me that." Maybe
So
you
I
can
know
choose. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I know one story about Ajahn Lee. So when he became a monk, so his father killed a deer for him, and he brought him the deer meat. But when Ajahn Lee knew that this was killed for him, so he could not eat it anymore, and then the father had to eat it himself, eat the deer himself.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's an important point, is that monks do not want to, let us say, play a part in the killing of an animal. But if the animal is going to get killed for Thanksgiving and everybody's coming to Thanksgiving and the monk's just an honored guest, there's no problem with that. But when the guy says, "Oh, I'm going to kill that bird for you," that's when it becomes so. This is, in fact, the whole quality of eating the leftovers. Let the lay people do what they're going to do with food. And then, in fact, much of the time, in fact, in Thai culture, they set aside portions for the monks. Rather than saying they're eating the leftovers, they actually get sometimes the best quality because the people are setting it aside for the monks. Okay, so this is where the Vinaya is. That there's a lot of strange things in there that go against our culture of today. And some of it is in cases is that the culture is now changing, going back to the way that it was in the Vinaya in the first place. That marijuana, in fact, is a medicine. Opium, in fact, is a medicine. I mean, if a monk has a broken bone, wouldn't you be okay with him smoking a, let us say, an opium ball? Which is different than getting addicted. In fact, opium has been a common thing in Thailand for many, many, many hundreds of years. It went south because of heroin. And they made they would take the opium, and instead of selling the opium, they would turn it into heroin so that they could transport it in smaller batches and make more money off of it. And so I would say offhand that heroin would be put into that category of heavy duty drinking alcohol, but opium is natural. How many of you have ever had actual opium? I've had actual opium. Never had any heroin, never had any morphine, never had any oxycodone or any of the things after some scientist or some chemist got a hold of it, but the raw stuff, I had that in India. It was in a little black ball. In fact, here's something that's very interesting is that the way that they traditionally collected marijuana and the way that they traditionally collected opium were very similar. They would use their hands. So the opium plant they would cut with a sharp knife, the poppy, and then the white goo would ooze out, and then they would come and they would scrape that opium goo into their hand, and then they would ball it up. Or the other guy would go over to the marijuana plant that was really heavy duty with its stuff, and he would do the same thing. Wouldn't pull the leaves off the marijuana plant, but he would scrape the juices and the flour and all of that into the palm of his hand this way, and then roll it into a ball. And so now you've got a ball of ganja, and you've got a ball of opium. Can you tell the difference? They're both really dark color, black. How do you tell the difference? You can, oh, they smell different. They smell different, but they look the same. And so the monks were able to use this stuff because it was, I mean, the king didn't make any laws against opium. The king didn't make any laws against marijuana. That's something that they do modern, and as I said before, often for political or financial reasons, not medical reasons. And so the Buddha allowed medicines. He allowed alcohol as a medicine. He allowed all the various kind of herbs that people would want to use, including aloes and all of that kind of stuff, and even allowed a smoking pipe. This is all in the Vinaya. That's why I had so much fun reading the Vinaya, is because you get all of these juicy little tidbits out of it. So, does anybody have any questions about this in general, or even any specific questions?
Well, I have a question not about this. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Just curiosity, I'm in Vietnam right now. Is there any place that would be interesting to check out?
Can you speak clearly and specifically for me?
Now I'm in Hanoi.
Okay. What's your question?
Is there any place that you think would be interesting to see? Or, I mean, not, or experience?
I have never been to Vietnam, but I would suspect that if I was in Vietnam, I would be going to the various Buddhist temples.
Yes, that would be my question.
And I imagine at the back door of the Buddhist temple, somebody is selling those little black balls we were talking about. So I don't have anything to say particularly about Hanoi, except that I'm glad the United States left the place, finally. Because they weren't doing anybody any good there. That in fact you could say that the real reason why Buddhism has spread to the West, talk about a silver cloud or a silver lining on a cloud, Buddhism coming to the West big time was because of the war in Vietnam. Big time. Why? Because Nixon bombed Laos. And because I think it was also Nixon and Johnson bombed Cambodia ferociously. I've actually been driving in the outback part of Cambodia to where they repaired the railroad that was being bombed by the Americans, but they often missed. And the roads were not repaired. And so we were in this truck, and we sometimes would go down into the bomb crater and then back up the side. Sometimes we would drive around the bomb craters, but these bomb craters were like 30 feet across and 30 feet deep. And this was in 2000s, which was 30 years after that bombing was done. And so many of the Cambodians wound up as refugees in Thailand. So many Laotians wound up as refugees in Thailand. So many Vietnamese wound up as refugees. Some of them got out of Saigon with the Americans, but many of them, in fact, there's still quite a lot of Vietnamese here in Thailand, but they were also housed as refugees. A good friend of mine, his name then was Buddy. He was in the American Peace Corps, and that he was part of that refugee. There were millions and millions of people in that refugee camp, as well as a whole lot of Thai girls married American flyboys, especially from Udon Thani. Also Sikit around Bangkok. And so literally hundreds of thousands and thousands of young Thai women got married and went to the United States when their husbands went. And then all of these Laotian and Cambodians and Vietnamese were left as refugee camps until the World Health Organization and a whole lot of countries got together and literally forced Reagan to take those refugees to the United States. And so from about 1981 till about 1986, many of those refugees were brought to the United States, often under the patronage of Christian churches. And I know, for instance, that in, I forgot the name of the town on the west coast of Michigan. The town was not much of a town at all until the Laotian people were imported there, and the whole town is Lao. In North Carolina, there was about 20,000 Vietnamese, about 12,000 Laotians, about 7,000 Cambodians, all brought to North Carolina. This happened in the 1980s. By the 1990s, they were building temples. And by the 2000, I was a monk in the United States living in those communities. So I know quite a lot about it.
Mm.
Buddhism came to the West on the heels of the war with Vietnam. All of there's even there's a Laotian Wat in Amarillo, Texas, of all things. You'd expect them in Denver. Here's something very interesting on the side, and that is that while the Cambodian and the Vietnamese Wats are just spread all over the place in cities mostly and all over the place, most of the Thai Wats are located around military bases. There are 2 Wats in Sumter, South Carolina, but not one in Columbia, only 60 miles away. The capital city of South Carolina does not have any Wats at all, but Sumter, South Carolina has 2 Thai Wats. Why? Because of Shaw Air Force Base. Okay. In Fort Bragg, North Carolina, what's the name of the town? I forgot it. Anyway, Fort Bragg has 5 Thai Wats. In this little dinky town, most of it is just a big military base. But in Charlotte, there's only 2 or 3. Why is that? Because of the military bases. And the Thai people, they are actually the Thai wives of all these military dudes when they came back in service. That's where they built their Wats, around military bases. That's why there's so many Wats around Fort Hood. There's even one, Michael, in Oklahoma City. How could there possibly be a Thai Wat in Oklahoma City? The answer to that is, guess what? Tinker Field. And so the whole point of this part of the talk is that Buddhism has come to the West big time because of the Vietnam War. What I'm most surprised on recently is how many Tibetan and Zen places have also made their way into the West because the Theravada opened the door. And now there is a huge amount. I'm impressed. In fact, right now we're still working with a list of about 3,000 different places trying to get information like photos and email addresses and descriptions, that kind of data, to put a huge database together for Buddhism in the West instead of having local money. Yes, Deidre.
I've been to a very big Tibetan Wat monastery in Belgium, Huy. Are you trying to organize or find all the Thai Buddhistic monasteries, or is it one for everything?
Actually, the answer to that question is it's the Westerners who are sectarian.
Mm.
The Asians are not sectarian. Tibetan Buddhism is just Buddhism plus Tibet. Thai Buddhism is just Buddhism plus Thai.
Vinaya. It's more like the Vinaya.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To where
Okay.
what you have in the United States and the West is a Thai Wat, a Tibetan Wat, a Tibetan center. And Tibet is bigger than Buddhism. And Thai, for the Westerner, is bigger than Buddhism. But in Asia, the Buddhism is the bigger thing, and what nation it comes from is just a matter of location. Why? Because they all believe, or they all understand the Dhamma as Dhamma, and Tibetanism is not the Dhamma. The Book of the Dead, the Bardo, the Tolka systems, the Tonkas, the mandalas, all of that is old Tibetan. Just like the spirit houses and the sacred trees and all of that stuff is the old Thai religion. But Thailand is Buddhist, and Tibet is Buddhist. And the United States, they don't see it that way. They see it as Tibetan or Thai.
Yeah.
And so this is what I'm trying to do, if we can, is to get the Western mentality out of the sectarian systems that they have developed with Christianity and Islam. Like I said, there is a rule in the Vinaya, in the Patimokkha. It's a big, important one. It's called a Sangha Dasesa, which means to break the Sangha, to make divisions. Christianity would have been a lot better off if that had been the number one rule in Christianity from the very beginning. That in fact, that's what Constantine tried to do, and boy did he make a mess of it in 320, when he says, you guys are not going to leave this room until you agree. And what they agreed upon was a bunch of crap, not what Jesus taught at all. And so all of the Western religions are sectarian, and so all the Western people see Buddhism as sectarian, where Buddhism itself is not. Tibetan monks and Laotian monks and Thai monks and Cambodian, Chinese were all the same. Here's something that's also on the side, but very, very indicative of this kind of thing. During the war, southern Vietnam was Theravada, and northern Vietnam was Mahayana because of the Chinese influence, to where in the southern parts of Vietnam, it was influenced by Laos and Cambodia. But the Chinese government, the Vietnamese government, after the war, says no more division, that the Mahayana in Vietnam and the Theravada in Vietnam have to join. Guess what? The monks thought that was a really good idea. And so now the monks can move back and forth with no problem. So here I am now walking into a Wat in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a Vietnamese Wat. It's got 2 monks there. And boy, did I get a surprise, what a laugh. Because those 2 monks, one was ordained as Theravada, but he dressed in Mahayana robes because he had been in the northern part and started to wear the Mahayana robes. The other one was Mahayana monk, but he wore Theravada robes. And here they are living in this Wat in harmony in Charlotte. And only a few of us know that distinction. Like the Vietnamese people, they know that distinction. The other monks that were around know that. But the people in Charlotte, they don't know, because they would think that it's heresy for, let us say, a Catholic priest to be the preacher of a Baptist church, and vice versa.
Wouldn't the world look a lot better if we would make those distinctions anymore?
Right. We need to stop making those kind of distinctions. They're not only irrelevant, they cause trouble. They cause dukkha. Wouldn't it be nice if Buddhism could come to the West as just one thing? The Dhamma, the Vinaya, the Dhamma, the Sangha. That's the way that it needs to come, without all of those distinctions. And my flag, my banner, is that video with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa in Thailand being host to the Dalai Lama from Tibet, teaching the Dalai Lama Paticca Samuppada. Now that, I think, is, I mean, have you seen that video?
Okay.
It's on our YouTube group. It's actually the easiest place to find it is on the front page of our website. It's right there prominently displayed on the website. It's our banner piece. Where the Dalai Lama calls Bhikkhu Buddhadasa his elder brother. Well, anyway, does anybody have any questions about this part of the talk? Carl, good to see you. Haven't spoke with you. I'm glad to see you come.
Yeah, nice to be here. My camera is not working for some reason, but maybe I'll reboot and maybe it's gonna. But it's really a pleasure to be here, and yeah, so nice to be part of the Sangha, and really dig your dialogues, Dhammarato. I look forward to be part of the teachings, go deeper. Apart from that, I don't really have any questions. Maybe just commenting on in some, like in the UK and Sweden. I think I'm Swedish. I live in Spain, but a lot of the national, like the original centers there, seem to be quite mixed. Like the original Buddhist center in London, or the Society of Buddhism in Sweden, seems to be able to blend the Dharma.
Yeah, the Asians don't have any trouble at all mixing and matching. It's the Westerners who are sectarian in their mental state. David, do you have any final comments?
You mentioned that the Dhamma itself specifies what the Vinaya was supposed to be in the first place. But that sort of implies that the Vinaya as it stands today doesn't really represent the Dhamma, right? The Vinaya as it stands.
I would say offhand, by reading it, it explains the Dhamma. It helps to understand the Dhamma. For instance, the Westerners are very highly regulated with laws and rules of religious rules and things like that. But by reading the Vinaya, you can see, in fact, that there are explanations for the way things are. And overall and in general, it's pretty loosey-goosey, because the real rule that we have, there's only really one rule. And you can actually begin to consolidate all of the rules that you've ever learned in your whole life down to just one little rule. And that one little rule is dukkha dukkha nirodha. Don't cause trouble. Don't gossip. Don't tell lies. Don't belittle other people. Don't talk frivolously. Don't be loose with the truth, but be precise, be exact, be careful with your language.
Yeah, the one rule, dukkha dukkha nirodha, specifies what the Dhamma is about. But I fail to see like what all the rules have to do in the Vinaya with that, actually. Like, for example, like 80 rules regarding like eating food.
Those were all customs, and the customs have changed. And the Theravadas were the ones who says we're going to keep the rules the way that the Buddha, like the way they were. See, while the Buddha was alive, he kept changing the rules. It was a hodgepodge. It was a mismatch. But when the Buddha died, he didn't change any of the rules anymore. He did give permission for the monks to change the rules according to the circumstances, and they got into a great big argument over which rules they were going to change, and so they eventually agreed we're not going to change any of the rules, and that was probably the dumbest thing that ever happened to Buddhism, was deciding that we're not going to change the rules, because that's what caused that kind of a split between Mahayana and Theravada. It wasn't over the Dhamma at all, it was over the rules. And so I give you just one rule. And if you can follow this rule, you'll be happy for the rest of your life. And that is, don't make a pretty woman your wife. That's the song, sorry. No, the one rule for life is don't hurt yourself and don't hurt other people. That's the only rule you need. Don't harm yourself and don't harm others. If you can follow that one particular rule, you'll have a marvelous, glorious life. But if you start following all the rules that they have in America, wow, you're going to be in court. You're going to be sorry.
Do you think if the Vinaya was allowed to be modified today, it would look much more simple?
All right, here's the answer to that. And that is, there, you already understand this. There is the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. The Patimokkha and the Vinaya are the letter of the law, and Dukkha Dukkha Nirodha is the spirit of the law. Can you hold the spirit of the law? Because if you can hold the spirit of the law, then the letter of the law doesn't matter anymore. In fact, the letters of the law were written 2,500 years ago, and they just happened to stop being modified by happenstance. To where during the life of the Buddha, he was changing the laws with circumstances. Every time that they would come by a new circumstance, he'd modify the law a little bit. And in fact, probably a better thing to have done is let's start over. Let's start with just Dukkha Dukkha Nirodha, and any laws that we make off of that need to follow that particular point, especially in your own life. I'm not talking about what the police down the road do. I'm not talking about what the politicians have to say. I'm talking about the way you live your life. Should have only one rule, and that is do not harm anyone. That's the only rule you need. That's the spirit of the law. That's where the Dhamma is the spirit, and the Vinaya is the letter. And the letter is being fixed, while the spirit of the law is changeable on the fly. Like I said before in this conversation, the Thai culture has its own idea of what the Patimokkha is. Now, basically, the difference between the Patimokkha and the Vinaya. The Patimokkha is a ceremony that has a particular rule stated, and the Vinaya is the stories behind all of the rules of the Patimokkha. And again,
I
the
feel
only rule
that
you need is Dukkha Dukkha Nirodha. That's the only rule you actually need. Go ahead, David.
do you think that's the only rule the monks need as well, or as everyone only needs that rule, or what?
Yes, which includes don't be a vegetarian and force people who are putting stuff in your bowl to take it back out of the bowl. That would be a Dukkha Dukkha Nirodha position. We don't need a little rule about thou shalt not refuse food. We don't need that kind of rule because we've already got it covered with the spirit of the rule. Another one would be gossip. Don't gossip about other people, because if the stories that you tell will get around. You can't trash talk other meditation teachers. If I trash talked all the other meditation teachers, and I got a good reason to, boy, do I know how to trash talk other meditation teachers, but I don't. Because why? Because they'll start trash talking me. Out of revenge. I will hurt them by trash talking about them, and they don't like that. So I refrain from trash talking other teachers. Right? But that's we don't need a rule, thou shalt not trash talk meditation teachers. We don't need that rule because we've already got one that covers that quite nicely. Dukkha Dukkha Nirodha. Is that making sense for you, David? You don't need all of those little rules because they're going to be followed naturally anyway under the big rule of Dukkha Dukkha Nirodha. Why do the monks still go out for Bendabat barefoot? It's because they'll upset people if they go out with high-heel jackboots on.
Yeah, but they don't upset themselves doing that.
But they'll upset other people.
Other people upset themselves, though, really, when you get down to it.
Yes, and they can't tell the difference. Those people are ignorant. So you have to take other people's ignorance into consideration. It's sort of like this, like you're walking through a crowded restaurant, and there's this guy, let us say, in his man pose with his knees as far wide apart as he can, and his right foot is right out in the aisle. Just because his foot's out in the aisle doesn't mean that it's okay for you to step on it. You don't step on the guy's foot, even though he's inviting somebody to come step on his foot. You don't step on his foot. You can see it. It's right there in front of you. So don't trip over the guy. He's waiting for you to trip over him. He's waiting for you to stumble on his foot. And he'll blame it on you if you step on his foot. It'll be your fault. Even though he's got it out there, the reality is that it's his fault. Okay, so the same thing now about that leg out in the aisle. The same thing is true about people who believe in rebirth and reincarnation. Yeah, they're a bunch of idiots, but don't rub it in. Don't trip over other people's stupidity. I mean, look at the really ridiculous things that Christians believe. Sky daddies flying through the air and dead man walking and no fuck babies and all kinds of really weird stuff that they keep believing in. But I can't say that to Christians, but I'm glad that I don't have any Christians. I haven't seen a Christian in 10 years. I know they're on the internet. I know they're in South Carolina, but guess what? I'm not.
They're in Thailand too, I think. There's a decent population of Christians, I think, in Thailand.
Good to see you, Mike.
Good to see you, Mike.
Respect.
Why don't we go ahead and finish this? I mean, we can. We've got this. We know what I'm talking about.
Mike?
I'm just giving some more examples of it. But you only need one rule, and that is don't cause harm, even to stupid people. Avoid their stupidity. Don't trip over it. Don't stomp on their ignorant toes.
Don't need to make enemies.
You don't need to make enemies. Make friends. And everything is cool. That's an easy enough rule. Don't make enemies. Make friends. You can find something that you agree upon. Like the best parts of Christianity and the best parts of Buddhism are the same thing. Do unto others the way that you would like to be done to. Don't treat people badly if you don't want to be treated badly. Then, in fact, Buddhism goes one step further than that, and that is render unto people the way they want to be treated, not the way that you want to be treated. You don't treat other people the way you want to be treated. You might be S&M. So don't treat people the way you want to be treated. Treat people the way they want to be treated, which means that we've got to put some wisdom in there. We've got to look at what's going on so that we don't harm other people. That's the only rule we need. That should be sufficient for your Vinaya, because that's all Dhamma. And let that old book of Vinaya just sit there, and we can pick it through and find all the juicy parts of it. But basically, we've already got all the Vinaya we need in that one 3-word statement, Dukkha, Dukkha, Nirodha. That's the entire Vinaya right there.
If that's all, sorry, one more point. I just want to ask, if that's the only rule we need, then why the monks make such a big idea about all the rules, 227 rules, and like reciting them, memorizing
Because
them?
they haven't recognized yet that making a big deal is dukkha.
Oh.
It's not a big deal. Just don't hurt anybody. Which means if you've got a bunch of idiots that believe in 227 rules, go right along with them. Yeah, 227. We got that wired. Yeah, let's do that.
Oh, okay. That's interesting, yeah. Yeah. I have to think about this. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah, you go think about it. Don't hurt those people who believe in 227 rules. They don't even know 227 rules. They only know the number 227. But I bet you cannot find a monk who can list all 227 of those rules. Not one monk you'll find it. I bet I could probably do as good a job as most Thai monks. Starting with the Parajikas and then the 57 Sangha Dasesas. And there's about 30-something rules on eating, and the others, I'm kind of lost, but I bet they can't even get that far. Okay? But they're gung-ho on 227 rules, even if they don't even know what they are. That's like the cops in the United States. They think that they know the law just because they're caught in this position of bullying somebody around. Well, I'm a cop, therefore whatever I say is the law. And most cops in the U.S. don't even know the law, just like 227 rules. Most of the monks who abide by 227 rules, they don't even know them by number. And that's okay. You can say, yeah, rah, 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 sis boom ba, 2227, let's go, boys. And go along with them.
Wat Tanu is supposedly just launched a training program so the monks can learn all the rules.
But that's an unusual Wat there. That's that particular Wat. If you were having it the other way, that would be the only thing that any Wat did anywhere in Thailand, and very few Wats are into the Patty Monk. Wat Tanu is the only one I know of on this island that's doing that. You get what I'm talking about now?
Yeah, it makes sense, because actually a whole bunch of lay people and monks came from Hat Yai. You know the city Hat Yai?
Yeah, it's a big city in the south. And they come here because they don't have any Wats there that are doing the 227 number.
Right. That's why they came here.
So while you're at Wat Tanu, you're just all gung-ho about 227 rules. But I bet most of the people who are in that Wat that are Sangho and gung-ho about them, they can't list them by number. I don't think I could remember 227 anythings in order.
I think there were some monks there that knew it by memory, like maybe the abbot of the program there.
Mm-hmm.
Could
Yeah, so you're
recite it.
talking about one person or two people rather than the whole crowd. Yeah, there are some spectacular monks. In fact, I know of in particular that there are a few monks that have memorized the entire Patimokkha, not just the Vinaya, word by word, but all the Dhamma Nikaya, all the Sutta Nikaya, all the Vinaya, all the Abhidhamma, most of the commentaries. They've memorized the whole thing. It'll take them 3 months just to recite through it. There are some spectacular human beings in the world. But most of them who go to the Patimokkha school, who go to the learned at 227, they don't already know them. But you can cover it by the spirit. All you really need to know is the spirit of the law of don't hurt anybody, including the ones who don't know all 227. Don't trash talk people. They're okay. Yeah, they're stupid, but don't tell them. Because that'll cause them suffering. You break your own rule when you trash talk people. And it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. They don't like it. So don't harm other people. Keep your mouth shut, unless you're in a particular conversation like we have here. So, Amrit, do you have any last things to say? We've gone almost 2 hours. Gosh, it's been a year or so since we've had a 2-hour-long talk.
Yes, thank you for your questions, David.
We'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much. This has been a delight. It's been a joy. I've been able to get some stuff off my chest in this one.
Kakumka.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone.
Okay, it's